Hello, welcome to class 25. Today we're going to be discussing overtime in sports.
Baseball. Extra innings. Extra innings is the extension of a baseball or softball game in order to break a tie. Ordinarily, a baseball game consists of 9 regulation innings. In softball and high school baseball games, there are typically 7 innings. In Little League Baseball, 6, each of which is divided into halves. The visiting team bats first, after which the home team takes a turn at bat. However, if the score remains tied at the end of the regulation number of complete innings, the rules provide that play shall continue until one, the visiting team has scored more total runs than the home team at the end of a complete inning, or two, the home team scores a winning run in an uncompleted inning. Since the home team bats second, condition two does not allow the visiting team to score more runs before the end of the inning. The end of the inning, including the batting order, availability of substitute players and pitchers, etc., remains intact in extra innings. Managers display caution to avoid exhausting all their substitute players during regular innings in case the game reaches extensive extra innings. The rule calls for a forfeiture if a team is unable to field a full team of 9 players. Home field advantage with extra innings. In Major League Baseball, home teams won about 52% of extra inning games from 1957 to 2007. During the same time period, home teams have won about 54 of all baseball games. Though the home team has some advantage in extra inning games, this advantage is less noticeable than the initial home field advantage. Home team tend to have the greatest advantage in run scoring during the first 3 innings. For the visiting team to win, it must score as many runs as possible in the first or top half of the inning, and then prevent the home team from tying or taking the lead in the second or bottom half. Because the bats in the bottom half of an inning, a home team wins the game by taking the lead at any point in the final inning. Normally, in such a situation, the moment the winning run scores for whatever reason, base hit, sacrifice, wild pitch, the game immediately ends and no other runs are allowed. The term for winning in this scenario is a walk-off win, as everyone can walk off the field as soon as the winning run is scored. The exception is if the winning hit is a walk-off home run. All runners on base and the batter must circle the bases on the home run, provided that they round them all correctly. So all their runs count for the final score. Each inning simply repeats the scenario. This is in contrast to the analogous penalty shootout used in ice hockey or association football, where shootout points are counted separately and only 1 point is awarded to the winner. Hockey, where if the game is recorded as a draw and the team winning the shootout is notably separately. Association football. However, the same procedure of counting runs as if they were scored in regulation is like the overtime procedure in American, Canadian football, and basketball. All right. Amateur boxing. Sudden death in amateur boxing. In amateur boxing, if both scores are equal and no draw option is allowed by the contest regulations, an extra round is appointed. Whoever wins that round scores the plus to one score and wins the match by slight margin.
All right, next I'll be presenting sudden death in water polo. If the score is tied at the end of 4 regular periods, the teams will play at least 1 overtime period. Under the NCAA rules, if the score is still tied after 2 3-minute overtime periods, the teams play 3-minute sudden death periods until one team scores. So the next team that scores wins. If the score is still tied at the end of those 2 periods, the teams compete in a penalty shootout. In the first round of penalty shootouts, 5 players and a goalkeeper from each team all take 1 penalty shot, alternating teams. If the score is still tied at the end of the first round, the same players shoot alternately until one team scores and the other misses. So this is what a penalty shootout looks like. There's going to be a goalie and the opposing team at the 5-meter line. And what happens when the whistle blows, you pick up the ball and you shoot the ball in one motion.
I did sudden death in soccer. This sudden death in soccer only happens in soccer cups, the Champions League, and the Europa League. This is mainly in European football. So the soccer cups, there's only the Copa del Rey, the Carabao Cup, FA Community Shield, the Copa Italia, the UEFA Super Cup. Usually they go for like the Copa del Rey for just the regular cups. They usually just go straight to penalties. There's no extra time. But for the UEFA Super Cup, there's 30 minutes of extra time. For the Champions and the Europa League, there's a away goal rule. So pretend, and there's also 2 legs. So pretend in the first leg, the home team scores 1, the away team scores 1, and in the second game, they score 0. That means the away team wins due to the away goal rule because they scored 1 goal in the way. So that means they won. But if it on aggregate, if the score is tied on aggregate, it goes to extra time, and then finally it finishes in penalties.
Basketball. Sudden death in basketball. So sudden death happens when the two teams have the same score at the end of the game or at the end of all 4 quarters. Overtime is usually 5 minutes in professional basketball, but can be shorter depending on age. So sometimes it can be like 2 minutes. To start overtime, the two teams will do a jump ball, just like in the beginning of the game. At the end of overtime, whichever team has more points wins the game. If the score is still tied at the end of overtime, there would be a second overtime, and so on until one team outscores the other, so there can be a third and fourth overtime.
Sudden death in volleyball. If the teams are still tied, the referee looks at the point differential between the two teams, meaning the difference between the winning team's number of points and the losing team's number of the points. If that still results in a tie, they look at the number of wins each team has against teams in the current tournament. Steps of tiebreaker. If there's a tie for any places in the standings, then the result of the in-season head-to-head competition shall be used to break that tie. If the tie teams split up in season head-to-head competition, the next step is to compare the total numbers of games within a match, won in the head-to-head matches between the teams involved in the two-way tie. The tie teams shall be seeded in order of games won. The games with the most games won is the seeded highest. If both teams in the two-way tie remain tied, the next step is to compare the point differential in matches between tie teams. The tie team shall be seeded in order of the point differential. The team with the best point differential is, The next step is breaking a two-way tie, which is each team's records versus the teams occupying the highest position in the league. Continuing down the division standing until one team gains an advantage. For steps D through F, when arriving at a group of tie teams while comparing records, use each team's record against the collective tie teams as a group. Prior to their own tie-breaking procedure, if the teams in the two-way tie remain tied. The next step is to compare the number of games. Then the next step is to compare the point differentials in all conference matches. Sorry, this is just an extra slide that I did, but I'm not gonna read it.
Yes. Overtime in tennis. When tennis players win 6 games each, they generally play a tiebreaker to decide the winner of the set. This may differ for different tournaments or regions. And at this point, both sides are worn out because they've been playing for probably like more than an hour. How it works, the player due to serve the 13th game serves the first point in her opponent's deuce court. After the first serve, the serve goes over to the other player who then serves the next 2 points, serving first into the ad court and then into the deuce court. After the third point, the players alternate serving 2 points each, always beginning at the ad court. After the first 6 points are played, no matter what the score is, the player's change ends until one player wins at least 7 points with a margin of 2 points.
So the next topic is going to be football. So overview of the game. It's a game that's played between 11 players on each team, with a generally egg-shaped ball, brown leather ball, and the team in possession tries to run the ball into the touchdown area, or they could either, if they're really low on time or like moves, I guess, they could kick it into the field goal, which you can see in the yellow, I guess, T-shape, not really T-shape, but fork-shaped thing, structure. This game is split into 4 15-minute quarters with 2-minute breaks in between. At the end of each quarter, they change sides, each of the teams. So that's the general overview of how the game is played. So the rules for overtime in football is if each team, if the teams tie at the end of the fourth quarter, then the referee does the coin toss, and whoever wins the coin toss starts out with the ball, and they have a 10-minute overtime. And if the score is still tied between the two teams, the game just ends in tie. There is no sudden death, and there's no like extra points awarded to whoever. But whoever does get more points than the other team at the end of this 10 minutes, obviously they win. And during these 10 minutes, both teams are allowed 2 timeouts, 2 3-minute timeouts, meaning that they could, if the team needs to huddle and needs to change up their plays, they're allowed that 2 3-minute timeouts during the 10-minute overtime.
Golf. A playoff in golf is how a tie is resolved after a match or a tournament. It is usually done by playing an extra hole or holes until someone takes the lead. There are 2 common types of playoffs, sudden death and aggregated playoff. Playoffs are usually held after the final round of the day, but 18-hole aggregate playoffs are held the day after. Usually for amateurs, a score-off runoff where people look at the scorecard and whoever had the better score for the last few holes wins is used. Sudden death is the more common playoff format. The tied players keep playing one extra hole until a winner is determined. Sudden death is used in most PGA Tour and European Tour tournaments. Some professional players prefer sudden death because they believe the better player will most likely win the game, while others think it's unfair for people to play through extra holes and lose on one bad swing. The aggregate playoff is the oldest playoff format in tournaments. Players play an extra 3 holes, 4 holes, or even 18 holes, and the player with the lowest cumulative score is the winner. If the players are still tied, sudden death will usually be played. Aggregated playoff is thought of as the most fair way of deciding a winner. However, a flaw of this system is that it usually takes more time to complete the sudden death, and sometimes tournaments may go after sunset. Sometimes they will even play 18-hole playoffs, which should take place the following day. The longest aggregated playoff was played by Billy Burke and George Von Elm in the 1931 US Open, and it went on for 72 holes. The match caused the USGA to rethink the rules for ties, and the rules for playoffs changed from 36 holes to 18 holes. The longest sudden death match was played by Gary Minikoff and Lloyd Ingram in 1949 in the PGA Tour. They were tied for 11 holes and then sun was setting, so the players and tournament official decided to end on a tie and declare them co-winners of the tournament.
Hockey. If the hockey game remains tied after the 5-minute overtime period, the teams will engage in a shootout. A shootout is when 3 skaters aside take penalty shots against the opposing goaltender. During the shootout, no player may shoot twice until every non-goaltender on the bench has taken a shot. If the teams are still tied after 3 penalty shots per team, sudden death shots will be taken. Sudden death is a term used in hockey when it's overtime and the first goal scored will end the game. The game ends immediately when a player scores a goal.
Table tennis. The general rule of table tennis, in short, is a game where two players have a paddle trying to hit the ball on the table without falling off the table. Also, at the same time, trying to make the opponent miss the ball and get a point. Usually, the match is up to 10 points before the opponent. However, you can change it to any other score capping if you would like in a non-professional game. You have 2 serves before it is your opponent's turn to serve twice. This is used to be 5 serves each, but since changing to 11, it's just 2. If you are playing a best of 3, 5, or 7, as opposed to just one set, you have to change ends after each game. This makes sure both players experience conditions on both sides of the table. You also change ends when the first player reaches the 5 points in the final game of the match. Next slide. How overtime in table tennis works. At 10 to 10, it's deuce. You must get 1 serve each and must win by 2 clear points. This is sudden death or table tennis equivalent of a tiebreak. It continues until someone takes the 2-point lead. It is used to be until 21, but now it goes on until it is cleared. And that is pretty much the overtime of table tennis.
Rugby. So what is rugby? Rugby is a game played by 2 teams. Each team has 15 players. And the goal of these 2 teams is to basically try to work together to get this like big football, I would say. It's a bigger type of football. The goal of these 2 teams is to get this big football over to the other side of the field. And through this, they can carry, pass, or even kick the ball all the way to the end zone. It's just that they're trying to make sure that the ball doesn't get into the hands of the enemy, in which it's a turnover. So the main way of which rugby is played compared to football, if we were to compare it to American football, at least, the way rugby is played is a lot more physical, I would say. That's because in rugby, you're mainly like just trying to get this ball to the other side, no matter what. You do not care what's in your way. While in football, you're mainly doing like downs and like passes and that sort of thing. While in rugby, it's a lot more physical, a lot more running, it's a lot more just like breaking through the line, if I were trying to get that sort of sense. And in rugby, these 2 teams basically compete for 2 40-minute halves with a 5-minute halftime. So how it usually work is basically they run down the field as fast as they can, they score the goal, and then the other team gets the ball, and then they have to do the same thing, basically, where they have to run down the field, score the ball, and just this keeps on going for 40 minutes until there's 5-minute halftime, and then you go on for another 40 minutes. An interesting thing about rugby is that with these sort of things, there's also a lot of different terms and a lot of different plays and that sort of thing of which teams use. However, I'm not really going to be going into the specifics of how the sport is really played. I'm going to be going into the specifics of overtime itself. And if you look into the bottom right corner of your screen, you could see like a rugby field right there. If you look into the bottom right corner, you see the rugby field, and on both sides you can see the end zones. And then Beside from that, you can see like the different zones of which the players play in, and then you can't really read it. There's a red dot in the center that says like basically the ball starts and that sort of thing. There's a lot more things to the graph. However, I'm mainly going to be discussing overtime and not really the general how to play rugby. Next slide. So now let's get into rugby's overtime. So with overtime, how it's now played nowadays is that there are 2 full-length extra time periods of 10 minutes. And in these extra time periods of 10 minutes, basically the teams play it out like normal. However, basically it's just more time to the clock, basically. That's how these extra 10 minutes work. And if the score is still tied after 2 of these 10-minute plays, what ends up happening that the rules call for a sudden death extra time. And originally this sudden death extra time was 20 minutes. However, it's now down to 10 minutes. So at maximum, you would say there would only be 110 minutes of a rugby match at maximum, because basically you have 80 minutes of real playtime. You have 20 minutes of extra like full-length quarters, full-length periods, and then you also have a 10-minute sudden death period. This sudden death comes after the full length time. So let's say you go through 2 40-minute quarters. What ends up happening is that in these 2 40-minute quarters, like both teams score a certain amount of points and they basically stay at that point at the end of the round. They equal each other. What ends up happening is that the next thing that happens is 2 10-minute quarters will then occur. That means that first 1 10-minute quarter will occur. They try to score as many points, see who has the most, still tied, let's do another one. So they do another 10-minute quarter. And then if the score is still tied after these 2 10-minute quarters, what ends up happening is that they transition themselves into the sudden death quarter, in which it's golden goal, basically. And in this, and if this fails, then there's basically no results in the scoring, then the standard rugby rules call for a kicking competition to be used to determine the winner. So basically whoever can kick the ball the furthest in that case. And that is the general basics of how rugby overtime works. There's a lot of strategy, as I've already mentioned. There's a lot of different rules, penalties, and that sort of thing. However, this is mainly what you have to know for sudden death in sports, specifically rugby. Thank you.